your career, a desk you held for 11 years, a show that beat every network rival in its time slot for 9 straight seasons. And then a friend, a fellow late-night host, a guy who has spent 2 decades competing against you for the same audience, turns around and offers you his own chair. Not a guest spot. Not 5 minutes trading jokes on a couch. An actual invitation to sit behind his desk and run his show while he's away. That's exactly what Jimmy Kimmel did for Stephen Colbert. And Colbert said no. For months, that no sat there without much explanation. Then, in a Variety interview published in late July 2026, Kimmel finally spelled out what happened, and in doing so, gave us Colbert's real reasoning for turning him down. According to Kimmel, he personally invited Colbert to join the rotating cast of guest hosts filling in for him on Jimmy Kimmel Live during his annual summer break. Colbert declined. Kimmel's explanation was simple. Of course I asked him, and I think it feels premature. He added that the door was staying open indefinitely. Anytime you want to host, it doesn't matter if it's the summer, I'll gladly step aside. Premature. One word. And suddenly a whole year of speculation about what Stephen Colbert is actually doing with his life snaps into focus. To understand why that single word matters so much, you have to go back to the mess that got him here in the first place. Late-night television runs on one brutal, simple rule: the ratings winner survives. Stephen Colbert broke that rule by getting cancelled anyway. When Colbert took over The Late Show from David Letterman in September 2015, nobody was certain the bet would pay off. He'd spent nearly a decade playing a fictional blowhard pundit on The Colbert Report, and reinventing himself as a more sincere version of himself, night after night, in front of a network audience, was no guarantee. For the first year or so, Jimmy Fallon's viral clip machine on The Tonight Show kept CBS in second place. But as Donald Trump's first campaign and presidency dominated the national conversation, Colbert's monologues got sharper and more political, and by the 2016 to 2017 season he'd overtaken Fallon. He stayed on top for 9 consecutive seasons, and heading into what would become his final year, Nielsen data showed his show still winning its time slot outright, with roughly 2.4 million viewers across dozens of new episodes, the only network late-night show gaining audience at all that year. The show had also just picked up its 6th Primetime Emmy nomination for Outstanding Talk Series. None of that mattered. In July 2025, Colbert told his studio audience that CBS was ending the show, with the final season running into May 2026. CBS and parent company Paramount insisted it came down to money, not politics or performance, calling it purely a financial decision against a challenging backdrop in late night, and stressing it had nothing to do with the show's performance, content, or other matters happening at Paramount. In its statement, the network went out of its way to praise him, calling Colbert irreplaceable, and promising to retire the Late Show franchise entirely rather than hand it to a successor. That framing was technically plausible. Network late night has been bleeding advertising dollars for years as audiences drift to streaming and YouTube clips, but the timing made it a hard sell to almost everyone watching. It's worth remembering just how unlikely Colbert's dominance was in the first place. He didn't come up through traditional late-night hosting. He trained in improv at Chicago's Second City, then spent years as a correspondent on The Daily Show under Jon Stewart before Comedy Central handed him his own show in 2005. The Colbert Report wasn't Stephen Colbert being funny as himself. It was Stephen Colbert playing a blowhard, self-important cable news pundit, a character so committed and so consistent that audiences spent years debating where the performance ended and the person began. That character became a genuine cultural force, especially after his 2006 White House Correspondents' Dinner speech, delivered a few feet from President George W. Bush, which mocked the Iraq War and the press's relationship with the White House so bluntly that the room reportedly went cold even as it went viral online. Media historians still point to that moment as an early example of how the internet could resurrect an awkward live event and turn it into something audiences would replay for years. Stepping away from that character to host The Late Show as himself was a real gamble. When he took over in 2015, there was no guarantee that Stephen Colbert the person could hold an audience the way Stephen Colbert the character had. It took roughly 2 years and a shift in national political mood for that bet to pay off, But once it did, it paid off for nearly a decade straight. 3 days before the cancellation news broke, Colbert had used his own show to take a direct shot at the company that signs his paycheck. Paramount had just agreed to pay $16 million to settle a lawsuit brought by Donald Trump, who claimed CBS's 60 Minutes had deceptively edited an interview with then Vice President Kamala Harris during the 2024 campaign. CBS denied any wrongdoing, and plenty of legal observers were skeptical the suit had much merit in the first place, which is part of why the settlement raised eyebrows. Money from the deal was earmarked for Trump's future presidential library rather than paid to him directly, but the optics were rough regardless. Colbert didn't hold back. He told viewers he was offended as a proud employee of this network, and said he doubted much could repair his trust in the company, though, he joked, $16 million would be a decent start. He called the settlement by what he said was its technical legal name, a big fat bribe. The subtext everyone understood was the pending sale of Paramount to Skydance Media, a roughly $8 billion deal announced in 2024 that needed sign-off from federal regulators, including the FCC, since CBS's broadcast license portfolio was part of the transaction. A lawsuit settlement that smoothed the political waters right as regulators were reviewing a merger looked, to a lot of observers, like more than a coincidence. Paramount denied any link between the two. 3 days after Colbert's monologue, his show was cancelled. The reaction was immediate and loud. Jon Stewart and Jimmy Kimmel spoke up publicly in Colbert's defense. Jimmy Fallon, of all people, Colbert's old ratings rival, posted that he was shocked, calling Colbert one of the sharpest, funniest hosts to ever do it. David Letterman weighed in critically against CBS's decision. A week after the announcement, Colbert's first show back drew a stage full of solidarity. Jon Stewart, John Oliver, Fallon, Seth Meyers, Adam Sandler, and others showed up in the audience, and Colbert opened with a dry line about cancel culture going too far, aimed squarely at his own network. Senator Adam Schiff, who was booked as a guest that same week, posted publicly that if Paramount and CBS had ended the show for political reasons, the public deserves to know. Behind the scenes, the merger context kept expanding. The Skydance deal, first announced back in 2024, was valued at roughly $8 billion and would hand control of the combined company to Skydance founder David Ellison, backed by Redbird Capital Partners. Because CBS owns dozens of local broadcast stations, the transaction needed sign-off not just from antitrust regulators but specifically from the FCC, which reviews any transfer of broadcast licenses. That gave the commission unusual leverage over a media company at the exact moment its flagship late-night host was publicly accusing it of buying political cover. After the Skydance deal ultimately won approval, FCC Chairman Brendan Carr said the incoming ownership wanted to reorient CBS News and address what it viewed as bias in the organization, remarks that fueled speculation about the network's editorial direction going forward. Leadership turnover followed quickly. CBS News President Wendy McMahon and 60 Minutes executive producer Bill Owens both departed amid friction over editorial independence, and journalist Bari Weiss, the former New York Times opinion editor and founder of the Free Press, was installed as editor-in-chief of CBS News, a hire that struck plenty of longtime staffers as a signal of real change at the network. Taken together, a canceled comedy show, a $16 million lawsuit settlement, an $8 billion merger, a federal regulator, and a newsroom leadership shakeup all landed inside the same few months, which is exactly why so few people outside CBS's own PR department were willing to call it purely financial. Colbert wasn't the only late-night host to get caught in the crossfire that year. In September 2025, ABC pulled Jimmy Kimmel Live off the air after Kimmel devoted part of a monologue to the assassination of conservative activist Charlie Kirk. Kimmel hadn't joked about Kirk's death. His actual target was what he described as efforts by some figures on the right to instantly spin the killing for political advantage. That distinction got lost fast. Conservative commentators and major ABC station groups, Nexstar and Sinclair among them, accused him of being insensitive, and ABC suspended the show while it sorted out the fallout. The suspension didn't last. Within about a week, ABC brought Kimmel back, saying the pause had been meant to avoid further inflaming a tense situation, and that talks with Kimmel led the network to conclude the show should resume. Kimmel's return monologue was raw. He choked up telling viewers it was never his intention to make light of Kirk's death, that he'd posted condolences to the family right after the shooting, and that his criticism had always been aimed at people exploiting the tragedy, not at Kirk himself. 2 weeks after Kimmel came back, he and Colbert staged a crossover. Each appeared as a surprise guest on the other's show on the same night, broadcasting from opposite ends of Manhattan and Brooklyn. Kimmel introduced Colbert as available for a limited time only thanks to what he called the Trump administration, and joked the pairing was a fun way to drive the president nuts. It was a pointed, funny gesture between two hosts who'd each just watched their networks buckle under outside political pressure, one temporarily, one permanently. Colbert's actual sign-off came on May 21, 2026, closing out nearly 11 years at the Ed Sullivan Theater. He told the crowd, over boos when he mentioned it was the final broadcast from that stage, that the run had been a privilege. No, we were lucky enough to be here for the last 11 years, all right? Can't take this for granted. In the run-up to the finale, Colbert hadn't hidden his frustration with CBS entirely. He and David Letterman reportedly staged a stunt-tossing studio furniture off the roof, a jab at network property that doubled as a joke about who actually owned the set he'd worked on for over a decade. Then, barely a day later, Colbert did something nobody quite expected. He went back on television. Not on a major network, but on Only in Monroe, a public access cable show out of Monroe, Michigan, the same small market program he'd appeared on back in 2015 as a quirky dry run before officially taking over The Late Show. The reunion episode brought in celebrity cameos including Jack White, Steve Buscemi, Jeff Daniels, and Eminem, and ended with the cast comically destroying the set and setting it on fire in a dumpster, with Eminem's blessing. It read as Colbert closing one chapter with a wink rather than a eulogy. That brings us back to July 2026 and Kimmel's offer. On paper, stepping into Jimmy Kimmel Live, for a few weeks that summer looked like an easy yes for Colbert. It would have kept him on network television, in front of a built-in audience, without the pressure of launching something new from scratch. Kimmel's summer guest host lineup that year already included names like Tiffany Haddish, Ike Barinholtz, Coleman Domingo, and later Anthony Anderson, Rosie O'Donnell, and Jelly Roll, a rotating cast of familiar faces keeping the chair warm. Colbert would have fit right in, and the ratings bump probably would have been significant. Kimmel's show, notably, had already posted its strongest monthly ratings in its 23-year history that June, up 24% from May and more than doubling its key demographic numbers month over month, a surge Kimmel partly credited to viewers who'd followed Colbert's audience over after The Late Show ended. But Colbert turning it down wasn't really about the offer itself, it was about timing. Barely 2 months separated his final Late Show broadcast from Kimmel's invitation. According to people close to him, cited in entertainment press coverage over the summer, Colbert was living a genuinely quieter life after 11 years of a nightly grind, leaning on his wife, Evelyn Evie McGee, for support, and adjusting to a schedule that wasn't dictated by a studio clock anymore. Kimmel's own word for it, premature, captured something real. Hosting somebody else's show, even a friend's, even for a few weeks, would have meant stepping right back into the exact format he'd just spent nearly a year saying goodbye to, without any time to figure out what he actually wanted next. That's also consistent with what Colbert has said about his own plans. Speaking to people around the time of his finale, he described wanting to take a real moment to think before deciding what came next, rather than rushing into another desk. The one project he did point to with any specificity was a long-simmering Lord of the Rings undertaking he's been developing with his son Peter, something he said they'd quietly been working on since the COVID era. Colbert has been open for years about being a lifelong Tolkien fan, and he's attached as an executive producer on The Lord of the Rings, The Hunt for Gollum, a passion project that has nothing to do with topical monologues or nightly news cycles. That, as much as anything, may explain why hosting a comedy topical show, even briefly, even for a friend, felt like the wrong move at the wrong moment. It would have pulled him back into exactly the kind of format and rhythm he was trying to step away from. Zoom out, and the Colbert-Kimmel story is really two friends on opposite sides of the same turbulent year in network television. Both had spent the Trump era as some of the president's most persistent and most personally targeted critics. Both watched their shows get pulled into political and corporate pressure that had very little to do with ratings. Colbert permanently, in a decision tangled up with a multi-billion-dollar merger and a lawsuit settlement. Kimmel temporarily, in a controversy that briefly turned his show into a national flashpoint over free expression. Both came out the other side still standing, still willing to needle the people who tried to sideline them, and still close enough as colleagues that one would hand the other his own chair without a second thought. Colbert's answer, "Not yet," doesn't read as a rejection of Kimmel or of television itself. If anything, Kimmel's parting line said it best: "The offer isn't going anywhere. Any time you want to host," he told Colbert, "I'll gladly step aside." For now, Colbert seems content to let that offer sit exactly where it is, while he spends time with his family, tends to a Tolkien project over a decade in the making, and figures out, on his own schedule, for the first time in 11 years, what he actually wants to do next. Whether that turns out to be a streaming deal, a podcast, another network show, or something nobody's guessed yet, one thing is clear: Stephen Colbert isn't disappearing. He's just refusing to let anyone else, including a good friend with an open chair, decide when he comes back. There's also a broader question sitting underneath all of this that has nothing to do with Colbert or Kimmel personally. What does it mean for network late night when the most watched host in the format can lose his job anyway? For nearly 70 years, the unspoken deal in network television was straightforward: win your time slot, and the network protects you. Colbert's cancellation broke that deal in full view of the entire industry, and Kimmel's brief suspension a couple months later showed that even a host who wasn't losing his ratings battle could still be pulled off the air over a single monologue. Neither situation was really about audience size. Both were about political pressure landing on networks that had other, bigger business interests riding on staying in Washington's good graces. That's part of what makes the two men's public solidarity feel less like typical late-night rivalry and more like something else entirely. Kimmel didn't just tweet support when Colbert got cancelled, he aired a rerun instead of new programming so viewers would tune into Colbert's farewell instead of competing with it. Colbert, in turn, showed up as a guest on Kimmel's show the same week Kimmel returned from his own suspension, trading jokes about a president who'd spent years calling both of them untalented and predicting their ratings would collapse. Neither prediction ever panned out. Colbert led his time slot for 9 straight seasons before the plug got pulled for reasons CBS never fully explained to anyone's satisfaction, and Kimmel posted the best ratings month of his 23-year run just weeks after nearly losing his show altogether. So when Kimmel says the door is open anytime, it's worth taking him literally. These aren't two competitors making a polite gesture for the cameras. They're two of the last hosts